The most effective attacks in 2026 won't be asking for money in the traditional way. They'll be threatening to tax your organization every day until you provide whatever it is the outcome is that they need.
Just push ahead. We need to be first. And everybody's fighting to be first, and nobody is considering the implications from a security standpoint.
Speed without control does not create advantage. It creates an asymmetric risk. All warfare is based on perception. And Sun Tzu wasn't talking about malware. He was talking about manipulating perception so that your opponent defeats themselves, essentially.
Our government IT is a creaky, leaky bucket of the highest order.
Societies haven't failed in the past because systems were imperfect. They fail when the trust of the systems they rely on collapse faster than they can adapt to those failures.
I just worry that security is going to be benched.
Indecision is the biggest risk and cost impact to companies when we talk about a cyber incident.
But if your fractional CISO is halfway across the world and only comes in on a Tuesday once every month, you're not going to survive.
We'd see degraded services. There'd be a lot of conflicting information, so a lot of confusion in the populace. And then there'll be partial outages that are really hard to manage and prioritize which ones we fix, which ones we don't.
I'm genuinely scared. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now, this is not the first release that we've done for 2026. The original plan was for that, but due to myself, that hasn't happened. Needless to say, it is tradition for us to sit down with a specialist or a couple of specialists in the information security space and kind of predict what we think is going to happen in 2026 and where have we been in 2025. So without further ado, let's get into it. So yes, 2025 is now finished and we're going into 2026. And it's definitely been some interesting times in the field of InfoSec for the last year, 2 years, 3 years. But where are we going forward? And to discuss this, I've brought on the fantastic Richard Cassidy, a long-term kind of co-host really for us, where we discuss where things are going and what have you. Richard, if they don't know who you are, introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great to be back. And for those that may not know who I am, because I'm sure you've seen my face on a number of these already, I am the EMEA CISO for Rubrik. And I get a very interesting perspective on things in my role because a lot of what I do, other than being a traditional CISO, is I get to spend a lot of time with other CISOs, CIOs, and the executive suite, listening to those stories, talking about topical items, deciding what's going to bite us next and how hard, and what are we doing well and what are we not doing well. So it gives me a great deal of insights as to what's occurring in EMEA specifically, but also APAC and North America to a lesser extent. I've been in cyber for, oh my goodness, this morning I thought about this, it's almost 3 decades now.
Yeah.
And I've worked almost exclusively in the cybersecurity space. I've seen pretty much every wave of security tool sets come and go, and those that have become staple diets stay. Done lots of breach investigations, I've built SOCs, managed SOCs, done dark web threat hunting on behalf of organizations. So a great deal of cyber, and it helps me articulate a lot of the challenges that we are facing. Because a lot of businesses we speak to, James, look at the problem from an abstracted perspective. It's kind of nice when you've lived through breaches and you've got the battle scars and you know how the attacker operates and you've been on the phone with the ransomware group trying to negotiate down the ransom. You get to bring a lot of credibility and a lot of real world, what do we do, how do we do it, into the conversation than just abstracted knowledge. So let's see how much of that I can bring into today's discussion.
Of which you always do, my friend. No, you're absolutely right. It's it's something I posted actually on LinkedIn, I think it was just after New Year's. There's all kinds of information you can get on InfoSec from all kinds of different places. And there's a lot more people now who are using, large language models that are popular in order to kind of get some advice on what to do with InfoSec. The thing about InfoSec is a lot of it's about wisdom. And as you absolutely put down, you have to have kind of got the war stories and the scars to kind of articulate what real InfoSec is. I mean, you mentioned something interesting in your intro there about what other CISOs and people who are kind of like involved in the security community have on where we are and what have you. I mean, what's the general consensus that they're saying?
Actually, you would think that it's fairly coherent and similar, but it isn't. The key themes, if I was to extract maybe three, one is that regulation is still a big pain point for all of the CISOs I talk to because of the evolving nature of what we're going to be seeing around DORA, the NIST framework, NIST 2, etc. The list goes on, right? Choose your regulation of choice. There's still a lot of battle there, a lot of uncertainty about how these changes are going to impact fundamentally how the business should operate. And what does that mean in terms of cost and procedure and policy changes? Always a big discussion point. The other one, and this is actually a great commonality, is we're seeing a lot of organizations now move to tabletop exercises with their executive teams.
Yes.
So they're starting to hit home and drive, bringing people on the journey, bringing their execs on the journey of, right, we saw what happened to Marks and Spencer's, Jaguar Land Rover, MGM, right, the list goes on. Let's really get around a table and discuss the impact that we would experience today based upon our perceived level of maturity. So there's a lot of discussion around how do we test maturity better? And it isn't traditional red teaming, purple teaming exercises or external pen tests. Well, that's still a really key part of everything. It's a real world test of the business's capabilities against a lot of the attack types and procedures we've seen previously. And I guess number three, in terms of consistent conversation, is, and it's on the lips of most CISOs, is what are we going to do about quantum? And where is it going to take us? And should we be concerned about it in 26, 27, 28, et cetera, et cetera? And there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of a lack of understanding in that space. But it's one of the most common conversation themes that I'm having with fellow CISOs is what do we think about where it's going to affect our business? What should we do to adopt, or if anything, changes around our quantum strategy? And where does that place us from a security, from a policy, from a regulatory perspective? And now you'll be surprised I didn't add AI into that because funny enough, it hasn't been the top three, interestingly, over the past year. It's been in the top four. So number 4 would be AI. But I think AI is woven into all of that, isn't it? Regardless of what we think, it's just a common current and theme of all of those things because AI would touch each one of those topics somehow, somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like from what you're saying and my own conversations with people as well, there's two aspects to InfoSec that are becoming more and more important and more discussed about. You've got the business aspect. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm seeing a hell of a lot more C-suites going through kind of wargaming activities, kind of like role play activities where they're trying to figure out what they would do in an instance that maybe has hit a bit too close to home. You mentioned some of the breaches. I mean, Ubisoft, for instance, had a massive breach that tanked again their share price. Not that it was doing particularly well over the Christmas period, and it's happening in all markets at the moment. And then you mentioned the technical side of things as well. And you're right. Quantum has kind of been overshadowed a bit by AI up until recently, I think.
Absolutely.
But we are going through such a technological shift, like a monumental technological shift in the next few years. When you look at both of those technologies and when you combine what they mean together, it puts it even further up into an interesting stratosphere that I'm not too sure what we're going to do with. And I think it's going to be a tectonic shift in security in general, the cybersecurity aspect from the technical side, but then you've got the business aspect as well. And I think, one of the concerns I've seen from a lot of people around this technological shift, and when I say people, I mean kind of InfoSec professionals, is after the dreaded lurgy that all made us all locked down for a year and a bit, there was a big surge in security awareness. The ransomware started getting really big, phishing attacks got really big, and so on and so forth. But now it's kind of almost being pushed back a little bit from where we were going, where we were becoming a lot more security aware. for this race to get to the new next level of technology. You hear about kind of all the regulation that was going to be being put in for instance, AI. I know it's I don't want to target AI specifically, but then you heard the American government pull back, say, right, no, we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to push ahead. We need to be first. And everybody's fighting to be first, and nobody is considering the implications from a security standpoint. And you're getting CISOs who are almost being kind of pushed again to the side in favor of making businesses more efficient through the use of AI. But the tectonic shifts that we're getting in just the economy when it comes to technology. I mean, have you seen the prices of RAM recently?
No. What's happened? I know it's gone up, but by how much?
You could get 32 gigs of RAM for about 120 odd quid, 130 odd quid in the UK.
That's right. Yeah.
Now over 500 quid.
Wow. Okay.
You look at some places, you can see where Corsair people have bought RAM from Corsair or from partners of Corsair, and they've had an email back saying, sorry, we're refunding you the money, without any reason for it. And then people going back and having a look at the price of the RAM that they just bought, and it's like almost doubled in price. The word on the street is that, the AI crowd are eating up all the GPU 5090s, that kind of stuff. And it's getting to the point now where NVIDIA have turned around and said, oh, all you gamers out there, why don't you just go back to a 3090 or a 3080 or something? And it's just like that. We've got lots of them available. We're seeing quite significant technological shifts and business shifts at the same time. And I just worry that security is going to be benched like it sometimes has done. Look at when virtualization kicked off. Everybody was going virtual. Everybody was creating cloud companies. Everybody was just going, yeah, whatever.
I love your point around the race to the next level of tech, because it's quietly rewriting who gets to decide risk. And we're not really only looking at a race to be first, are we? It's a race that's changing who is allowed to voice what that risk looks like and what it is. And in many organizations I speak to, and by the way, at government level too, let's not leave government out of this talk track. The CISOs aren't being sidelined because the business doesn't care about security or governance risk compliance. They do. They're being sidelined, to your point, because speed has really become a dominant currency. Let me take that one step further, because efficiency is being mistaken for advantage, right? So AI is a good example. So AI efficiency has become synonymous with competitiveness. Really, every business leader I speak to, AI is looked at as a competitive tool. And it's been seen less as kind of an internal capability enablement tool. It's about being better at doing something from an external competitor's perspective. And I know that isn't the only reason, but it's the most dominant topic of conversation I'm having. What we're talking about is faster decisions, faster product cycles or releases to market, faster deployment of whatever it is that we develop as a platform or technology. And I guess in that environment, anyone whose job is to talk about second order effects starts to seem like they're the friction in the conversation. That's a hard point to settle on, because the other issue around that is speed without control does not create advantage. It creates an asymmetric risk, and the upside is clearly visible and immediate, but the downside is often deferred. It's fairly opaque, and it becomes a bigger problem. And I want to weave in a bit of politics here, because you talked about US governments and the things that are going on there. I mean, this isn't just US, it could be any government. When you talk about governments, particularly the US in this case, you're going to hear the same framing over and over again, right? If we don't move first, somebody else will, right? And that logic always makes sense in geopolitics. It's how the world runs at the moment, unfortunately. But it becomes very dangerous when you import that mindset into the enterprise decision-making process. And the reason why is this: nation states can absorb failure. Companies often have very low tolerance for failures. And your point on the CISOs, just to finish on this, here's something that we all need to come to terms with. CISOs aren't being sidelined in these conversations because they're wrong. We know they're very right about some of the things they're raising. they're being sidelined because they're speaking in risk while everybody else is not speaking in terms of opportunity. And the reason that's a problem is opportunity narratives always get the budget, and risk narratives get usually. Let's talk about it later. But we already have a process for managing that risk. Let's focus more on the opportunity. And then it all goes well until something goes wrong, and then we're back to square one. And that's where we're at in terms of, trying to get to the next big thing and be the first mover. It's not the way that we really should be thinking about it. So yeah, some great points there, James. I just thought I'd add to them.
It's definitely interesting. I mean, there's a couple of things that have happened recently. I mean, I mentioned Ubisoft. I mean, that was an interesting attack. I did some analysis on what information we have at the moment. And it's kind of showing, how adaptive the bad guys can actually be, the malicious actors can be in this case. Because what they did was they broke in and they started giving free in-game currency on one particular popular game, which meant all of the kind of developers and the people, apparently Ubisoft said, were like, what's going on? Or why all of a sudden are all these gamers buying all of these skins and stuff? They haven't earned the currencies. Someone's gotten in. And whilst they were distracted with that, a group of crackers, probably the same ones, or a subset of the same ones, went off and nicked all the source code for every single game apparently they had. So whilst they were sort of have some in-game currency going, everybody was worrying about that. Whereas the real worry was, well, the guys have got the keys to the kingdom now, guys have got all the source code. So, you're now kind of pretty stuffed. And the other piece that was interesting for me from a security standpoint, a certain leader in the Western world who may or may not have gone in and grabbed a particular other leader from a state a little bit south, a country a little bit south, who may or may not have been blockaded for a little while. We all know who that is. In his statement, he said, something along the lines, and I'm probably misquoting here, but he did specifically said, we went in, blah, 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 and the troops went in, but we used other measures, and they actually turned off the power, which, we've all known people can do. But, the cyber warfare is very much starting to get concerning to me, because there's all kinds of people rattling all kinds of sabers all over the place. We know it's happened in the past. But critical infrastructure like power and what have you, we need to start securing some of our key assets as a society. We've all been focused on banking, and we've all been, it's important. Obviously, security is important at all levels. But with this movement of technology, the velocity of speed that people are developing new ways to interact with technology, new ways to facilitate technology, both with AI, quantum, and the scarcity that we have now of component parts to even buy a laptop, for a new member of staff, because the prices are rapidly rising. I'm just really, really concerned. I mean, it's not just that. I'm seeing a lot, and I'm sorry, vendors out there, I'm seeing a lot of vendor price rises, ridiculous vendor price rises as well, to the point where we've got customers who said, we can't pay that. We can't pay that renewal. It's just too much. Are you seeing something similar? I mean, obviously you're a CISO, so you might need to be a bit careful what you say, but am I resonating at all here, or am I just...
No, you're resonating, and I'll talk about my cost challenges, and it isn't into 2026. It's something I saw way back several years, right? And it's only getting worse. But if we talk about some of the points you mentioned around the Ubisoft attack and the invasion of another country and the things that happened in the West, there's a great quote by Sun Tzu. If you haven't read Sun Tzu's Art of War, I highly recommend it. And
I love it.
The one quote that I will draw out from that book that's relevant to this discussion is, all warfare is based on deception.
Yeah.
And Sun Tzu wasn't talking about malware. He was talking about manipulating perception so that your opponent defeats themselves, essentially. And the Ubisoft case is a textbook example of how that principle is applied in the digital era, or and the fourth industrial revolution, as we're now calling it. And this is where the line between cybercrime and, I guess, cyber warfare becomes blurred, doesn't it? Because the tactics are the same, The only difference here is scale and intent. And cyber warfare isn't about hacking in the traditional sense, is it? It's shifted now to control of the systems that humans depend on. And I want to be careful about how I position this particular statement around geopolitics. You mentioned the statement of the Western leader and the military action that ensued, where cyber measures were put in place, and turning off power is a great example of that. What's striking there isn't that cyber was involved per se, it's how normalized this language has become. The reason I say that is because cyber is no longer described as an attack in the traditional sense. It's described as a means, essentially. It's a very uncomfortable point to talk about, but it tells us something very important, right? Because cyber capabilities have matured to the point where they're now assumed. It's a bit like the old traditional sea or air superiority, or the ability to do logistics disruption in warfare. And once something becomes assumed, it stops being debated. And the reason that this is interesting is because the language we're hearing, the narratives we're hearing from specific government leaders is normalizing a lot of what we're seeing. And the world is starting to accept this is just the way that it is. And infrastructure is power, right? That's a quote from Václav Smil, a well-noted energy scholar. And Smil studied the systems that societies actually run on. So to your point, James, energy, logistics, production, healthcare, all these sorts of things. And cyber warfare targets all of those systems because that's actually where the controls points live in our lives. And if I connect this back to the business sense, right, the cyber sense, which I believe is a critical point, for business leaders, this should be really unsettling as we move into 2026, because the same techniques being used in geopolitical conflict are now being used against companies. And Greg mentioned it fantastically around Ubisoft. They're doing the same things, just without the military uniforms. They're turning off power, they're disrupting communications, they're manipulating signals that you look right whilst the attack's happening left. And it's really a control layer attack. And if you take the Ubisoft case, by the way, to the next kind of state-level cyber activity, I see a pattern emerging here. The goal isn't, Ubisoft, it was theft. But actually, their operational model was to change decision-making. And so make the defender focus on the wrong thing, delay the right response, collapse confidence in all the signals, right? And basically what you get there is suboptimal decisions. And back to one of the points I raised earlier about on the top 3 conversations, it's about maturity and capability in a real cyber scenario and understanding how could we be distracted? How do we, reduce the risk of suboptimal decisions? Because when you're confused, you're already defeated. And this is well-known in military doctrine. And it's really important to understand because traditional security has always, and it drives me nuts, assumed linear escalation, right?
Yeah.
Detect, analyze, respond, recover. But the attacks you're seeing, like the ones in Ubisoft, they break that chain completely. And they also break it psychologically. So we have to rethink things as CISOs and board members and practitioners. And it's time to get more involved in tabletop wargaming and maturity exercises for sure.
You're absolutely right. A lot of people still consider kind of like security, let's use the wider term, as a bit like, an IT problem. Not as in it is an IT problem. There's plenty of people who still think that. But it's just like there's a linear way to fix it. When it's hitting the fan, there's a linear way to fix it. You just kind of go through the steps. You run the playbook. Anybody who's been involved in incident response knows that it really isn't the bloody case. There's a lot of stuff that tangentially goes off to the sides. And kind of what you're seeing isn't necessarily the truth. One of the things that I trained a lot of people in when I've been mentoring and all the rest of it is look at the story behind what's going on. Don't focus on what is happening. Pull back a set. Just have a look. What's the story? Is this a salesperson going in to steal the CRM database because they're going to go and leave? Are they providing distractions, by causing problems with HR and what have you, whilst they're doing this quietly in the background? What measures have taken place? What have you done? There's all kinds of stuff. And I mean, this Ubisoft thing just goes to show. There's a lot of different attack patterns that are coming out and they're getting more and more complex. They're getting quicker as well. The velocity of attacks is one of the things that I wanted to discuss with this. They're getting faster. They're getting more enabled. dare I say it, we've mentioned it a few times with the dreaded AI starting to do a lot of the mundane kind of tasks in these kinds of attacks and speeding up the ability that these malicious actors have, be they nation states or be they, just malicious actors looking to take advantage of business. And you're absolutely right with what you said. Everything's getting blended together. I mean, I'm genuinely scared. Because, again, you look at, let's go with government. We all know hopefully we all know in the UK that our government IT is a creaky, leaky bucket of the highest order. I mean, it doesn't matter which department you go into, we've all heard the horror stories of hospital kind of projects going wrong and going way over budget. And, you hear the horror of the types of how old the equipment is that people are using. If you talk to any civil servants, they'll quite quickly tell you that they're using a lot of out-of-support systems still. We're kind of screwed from a security standpoint. I mean, if another government came to or another country decided to invade the UK and utilise, obviously, cyber warfare as a key aspect, similar to the way that other country did, we're kind of knackered. But then I don't think we're alone in that. I think a lot of other countries are in the same boat. We've got so many avenues we've got to cover these days. I'm actually getting worried of what the CISO is going to look like. There's been a lot of talk over the Christmas period. I've spent a bit of time looking through what people are talking about. And they're talking about how, like, the CISO role is evolving quite quickly. There's a lot more to that role now than there ever has been in the past. I mean, is that fair to say? Or again, am I talking complete rubbish?
You've raised some very uncomfortable points, but they're points that we have to come to terms with from a reality perspective. I've sat in front of many government departments in the United Kingdom. And by the way, to help those that are listening or viewing, it's also the same across other parts of Europe. So don't think the UK is a bad bucket, but they're not great. In the league table of not great, we're up there. And I have had my jaw drop in some conversations. One of the government departments I sat in front of, and I really cannot give any information to who this government department is because will run for the hills if you know. But I sat in front of this team and I asked all the basic questions. Who owns your security decision-making process? In this case, they didn't really have anybody. They had a virtual CISO that was available probably once or twice a week for a couple of hours. So if an incident did occur at this central government department, the indecision factor would be increased by a significant fold. Then when we talked about just standard security technology platforms, there was a lot of old technology, of course, as you've said rightly, but they weren't really correlating that data centrally anywhere. They didn't really have, and this is the bit that really annoyed me and blew my mind at the same time, and it's a common theme. When I asked, okay, so you're this central government department, and here's what you do for the rest of the government departments that you service. Do you know what type of attacker would target your data? And have you built a threat-led defense system around that? Mm-hmm. Now, remember, this is a government department that have unfettered access to the NCSC and really shouldn't be in a position where they can't answer this question. And not one person, and I'm talking engineers to database admins to application owners to leadership, had zero clue as to what type of attacker they'd be up against. And this won't be isolated, okay? This will be rinse, repeat across healthcare organizations, you name it. So, anyone who spent time in public sector knows exactly how fragile the entities themselves are because of the things you mentioned, right? Legacy systems, out-of-support equipment. And that's no secret to us, right? And the adversaries know it too, so we're all aware of it. But to use the term that you've used, how screwed are we? Well, we are really screwed if a serious nation-state level adversary decides to push hard. And then you have to ask yourself, what says they haven't already pushed and they don't already have a foothold in these organizations? And the honest answer is, we are in a bad state, but not in the way that people would imagine traditionally. Because we wouldn't see a movie-style cyber blackout where everything goes dark overnight. What we'd actually see is something much more uncomfortable. And here's what that would be. Because I've had these conversations with those in utility spaces and those in other critical national infrastructure going through a set of exercises and have done for the past couple of years, thankfully, where they're thinking about wartime economics and things going horribly wrong. So the good news is for listeners, government's already asking organizations to think about this. But what we'd actually see, and the common themes of discussions I've had, is we'd see degraded services. There wouldn't be a total collapse because there'd be a level of capability somewhere, but it'd be massively degraded. There'd be a lot of conflicting information, so a lot of confusion in the populace. And then there'll be partial outages that are really hard to manage and prioritize which ones we fix, which ones we don't. And so what happens is you get public confusion, which is amplified by misinformation. And I guess to put that simply, you just get friction everywhere. And by the way, when we talk about disruption, friction is enough. You don't need to win militarily. You just need to make the system struggle to coordinate well enough that there's a lack of confidence at a populist level in those systems and services. And then that creates disarray, and away you go. And actually, history teaches us really well here. Societies haven't failed in the past because systems were imperfect. They fail when the trust in the systems they rely on collapse faster than they can adapt to those failures. So, you're raising, everything you're saying is absolutely on point. It's something we all need to be thinking about. And if we do see these disruptions occur in these little pockets, and we do see services degraded, what is it that we can do to maintain a level of autonomy at a family level, at a community level, to be able to weather the storms that we're going to be seeing coming, should we fall into some level of, international conflict?
Oh, lots to unpack there, isn't there? I mean...
But let's bring it back to kind of the security side of things, I guess. This is why treating cyber purely as an IT problem, to your point earlier on, is so dangerous, because when things get messy, and they will, right, the limiting factor hasn't been, well, have I got the right technology in place? Have I been patched? Yada, yada, yada. It's actually leadership. It's decision-making. And it's with coordination in these times. And that's something that we just need to focus on more. We know the crisis is going to hit, but how do we reduce the impact by good leadership, good decisions? That I don't think we've thought enough about.
This is why I love chatting to you, Richard, because it's like, you mentioned it right at the beginning. You've got a kind of a background in and an interest in psychology, and psychology is very important for maintaining a good team, but it's also good to utilize that discipline when it comes to being in the middle of an incident, not just handling your team, but also handling the other people who are putting pressure on you to fix whatever the problem is. Fix it now, fix it now, fix it now. So stop, let us just sit down, just deal with this. And I think there's a lot of InfoSec people out there, and I don't mean this in a nasty way, but I think there's a lot of InfoSec people out there that are like InfoSec people in name only. I'll be honest, you mentioned earlier on about the fractional CISO. I like fractional CISOs. If you're an organization and you can't afford a full-blown CISO, they are expensive. Let's be honest, they are expensive. Then a fractional CISO is good. But if your fractional CISO is halfway across the world and only comes in on a Tuesday once every month, you're not set up, you're not geared up, you're not going to survive. I've seen it before where an incident is kicked off and the CISO has 72 hours worth of journey time to get to where they're going. And it's that's 72 hours, of which some of it is on a plane. Some of it is when you're going to be in a position where you're not going to be able to be on a Teams call handling things. People have ticked a box for their compliance. Again, you go back to compliance and regulation and all the rest of it. One of the big frustrations, I think one of the things we need to fix in 2026 is that we need to objectively look at security people. Leadership is absolutely one thing that we need. The right training, what skills those individuals need in order to secure the key assets that we have. If you're a government, you'll have key assets. If you're a critical infrastructure company or part of that remit, power, water. I mean, I'm in Tunbridge Wells, and we went for 6 days, 5-6 days without any water. And I put up on LinkedIn, I said, I'm an InfoSec person, but this is a good point of redundancy, which is a standard core part of critical services and security. If you've got one water treatment plant servicing 25,000 people, You have to ask the question at some point, why have we only got one? What happens if it burns down? What happens if it falls apart? What happens if the work, sinks into a hole in the ground? And it's the same thing with InfoSec in general. And I just think that there's a lot of organizations out there in the commercial world as well who are riding the lightning by not taking it seriously, by not getting the right kind of CISOs in. Oh, it's a tech problem. It's not a tech problem, guys. That's just one part of it, an important part. That's one part of it. And I think over 2026, we need to kind of really look objectively at all the new regs coming out talking about threat intelligence, good example, threat-led pen testing, threat-led this, the threat-led that. CTEM is becoming a real sort of big talking point at the moment around understanding where your vulnerabilities are at any one point. But then you've got the whole thing, well, what are we going to do about them? Because I still have to negotiate quite often with the IT department to actually fix some of these problems. But then there becomes a business decision because maybe they don't have the budget. I know security people definitely don't have the budget, because one of the general consensus I see from a lot of security people is we don't quite have enough to be able to secure the assets that we're here to secure. Doesn't matter whether you're in government or whether you're in commercial. It's actually probably worse if you're in government than if you're in commercial.
What's the cost of indecision? This has got to be one thing that we have to understand. And if you look at IBM Research, they have estimated in their latest reports that the average economic cost is 800. So for every hour that an incident goes unresolved, the cost to the business is $800. All right. Now, by the way, that scales really quickly when you include other things like operational downtime, involvement of legal, the reputational fallout, and the net effect of that. But that's the minimum factual figure. And actually, there's another figure that we discovered from what happened with Scattered Spider and Shiny Lapsus Hunters on when an attacker's in your organization. So you realize something's wrong, and now you've got to make a decision on what you're going to do about it. So for every day that the attacker remains in your environment, and don't quote me on this, but the figures are reasonably accurate, you increase the time scale of having to go and further respond to that incident by a factor of about 9 or so days. So for every day the attacker stays in your environment, it takes you an additional 9 or so days, depending on your level of maturity, so it can go up or down, to go and find out what else happened. The reason that's important is if you have a large house, you live in a country manor, which most businesses are, right? They have east, west, north and south wings and annexes and all sorts. So imagine a burglar gets into one wing of your country estate and you then have to go looking for them. Well, every minute that you don't find them, they're moving somewhere else, which means you've got to search more rooms, right? It's the same principle as cybersecurity. The longer they're allowed to stay in your environment, once we've detected the breach, the longer it takes you to find out the damage they're doing and the trail of breadcrumbs they're leaving. So indecision is the biggest risk and cost impact metric to companies when we talk about a cyber incident. So it's something that we've got to get really better at managing. And that means understanding who owns the conversation, who owns the decision of, do I shut down the application? Do I pull the plug to my cloud service? Do I turn off all, whatever the decision is, no matter how serious it may appear to be, who makes it and who is empowered to make that decision? And then have you stress test them in the scenario where they would have to make those decisions? Because like we said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Thank you for that. So to answer your question at kind of a level, it's indecision for me that's a big problem. And that also starts in your technology buying decisions and your third-party supplier decisions. One of the retailers that got attacked last year, I can't name them, they hadn't quite yet pulled the trigger on a technology that would have allowed recovery of the platforms that were targeted by the group. That indecision, you see the outcome. And I mean, that's a horrible example, but it's a real one of what I'm talking about here. So, if you're an executive leader, you're somebody that sits at the coalface and uses these tool sets, if they're not doing the job you expect them to do, or if they can't fill the narrative of your resilience capability, then you've got to go change it, because don't wait for the incident to happen to realize you have a problem. Let's make the decisions now. Let's make the tough calls now so that we reduce the impact when the thing eventually occurs. Listen, if you're hiding under a rock, then I applaud you, but you will realize the world is in a very precarious situation right now, and the chances of nation-state politically based attacks on infrastructure in other countries is pretty high at the moment. And so if you're an organization that services critical national infrastructure or has deep relationships with the Western economies, you need to turn up DEFCON level and up the ante on the kind of things you should be looking for and reviewing your security strategy around the types of attacks and attackers you're going to be up against. Because to wait would be a massive act of negligence. And it's something I would recommend you do now.
So there we go. I mean, in the last couple of moments whilst we're here discussing it, so for 2026, and one thing that you do mention, and we haven't even gone down that particular rabbit hole, that's a podcast in itself, is third-party reliance. There's a big problem there. Organizations have become so compartmentalized with their technology these days, and you're reliant on the security being the same throughout the chain. But we'll discuss that another time. But I mean, for 2026, security has become even more important than it ever has been. Yes, we're speeding our way towards a new level of technology through a number of different innovations, but we shouldn't be ignoring security around that. And weirdly enough, if anything, if AI agents become as good as everybody says they're going to be, especially the VCs, then they're going to save a lot of money on staff. So spend some of it on security. It might be worthwhile, some of what you saved. But, better leadership, more idea of what your assets are, takes more seriously what you provide to, the markets that you work in, because there's a lot of intertwined in there. And if you are a government or critical infrastructure, do it now. Don't just kind of ignore it. Don't kind of just tick a box. Don't just bring something in because somebody told you needed to at least have a look at it. Get some real InfoSec professionals in to help build your strategy, facilitate what needs to be facilitated, and test it as well, and test your incident and incident response. We've been talking all the way through about wargaming being so important. I think it's a very, very good level of awareness for C-suites and business owners as well, to actually understand some of the challenges behind what InfoSec professionals face. Is that fair to say?
Look, it's absolutely fair. And one of the things to wrap up on that I really have seen, and these are attacks that I have been involved in, and CISOs have called me for my advice and experience, is the economic model of cybercrime is shifting from traditional theft to time drag. Now, listen, if the attackers know that if they can present you with a problem where you're not going to be able to recover your key systems that keep the lights on for an inordinate amount of time, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to pay for a level of data or knowledge that will get you back to operational efficiency rather quick. Look, ransomware has trained the industry to expect cybercrime to be loud and transactional. But that model has its limits, right? Because for attackers, it attracts law enforcement, it creates traceable money flows, and it's kind of episodic, really. But what's replacing it is far more insidious. It's this time drag on operations, and from attackers' perspective, this is very rational economics, because boards will pay millions to restore their growth, productivity, and customer confidence without ever declaring a cyber incident. So if I go and target a high net worth individual or a service account, or let's not even, we are going to talk agentic AI. I take an agentic AI account that's got unfettered access, and then I call you and say, I have the ability now to turn off the lights in your business for an unknown amount of time. All I ask is that you do X, Y, Z. I'm telling you, it's a horrible conversation to have at a moral level, but there are many board members and CXO leaders that would rather pay for the disruption now in terms of money than the months of disruption that we saw JLR, Marks and Spencers and others go through. And it's a really, really important shift, okay? So the most effective attacks in 2026 won't be asking for money in the traditional way.
Yeah.
They'll be threatening to tax your organization every day until you provide whatever it is the outcome is that they need. So that's something we really need to think about when we're building our strategies into 2026. And the last point I'd love to make, James, is the real shift this year won't be more risk, because I think we're fed up of hearing about more risk. It's a loss of what I'm calling shared reality. So let me just elaborate on this as briefly as I can. The rise of deepfakes, of AI-driven attacks. I mean, dude, I'm looking at Facebook videos, and I, honest to God, and I would consider myself an expert, I'm now finding it really hard, still not quite to the point where it's impossible. It's really hard to decide if this is AI or not, okay?
Yeah.
So most 2026 predictions will talk about more attacks, but they need to talk more about smarter AI and the deep fakes that are going to be hitting organizations. I was just got off the call with the CIO of a large insurance firm, and they had their CEO targeted by a WhatsApp social engineering attack, and then the reports of the CEO. So, and this happened in the last week, right? And a very convincing, almost existential attack on this organization. So what's really important is attackers don't really need to break systems anymore. They just need to look as convincing enough as they need to get you or somebody else to do something. And whether that's reset passwords at a help desk, which is something we saw last year, or get you to transfer funds or edit a contract or give access to a system, that's what is going to be a real challenge for us. So we're going to have to get much better at identifying what's real and what isn't, and making sure that we educate our users and organizations better to detect this growing age of AI deepfakes and this new sophisticated social engineering attack vectors. So just two things I really want listeners to take away. If you haven't listened to anything else we said in the last while, those two things are the ones I'd be focusing on at the board and strategic decision-making level this year.
And you know what, the deepfakes thing, that's going to be, again, another podcast in itself, because I want to discuss that, because I have so many podcasts now, it's very, very easy, as I found out from one of my staff members who showed me an audio message that sounded like me, and it wasn't me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It was only because the number was different. But anyway, our time together has come to an end. 2026 is coming forward. We've got loads of good content, some of which we've discussed here. Richard, we're definitely going to get you back in to discuss the deepfake stuff and various other bits that we've been talking about, because I think it's really, really important. And to all of you out there, thank you ever so much for the support that you've given us over the last few years. I mean, we're well over approaching 15,500 subscribers just on YouTube alone. In YouTube, in Spotify and all the other mediums, it's getting pretty high as well. So evidently the content that we're doing is hitting home in the right kind of way, and we've got a hell of a lot more to discuss. So thank you ever so much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe these videos. It's great for the algorithm. We do get the odd shadow ban from time to time, especially when we talk about certain types of content. So it is great if we could have that as well. And thank you, Richard, for coming and chatting to us about what we think about 2026. To all of you out there, Happy New Year. Look after yourselves. And if you need any help, get in touch with me, get in touch with Richard. We're approachable. Just find us on LinkedIn, DM us. Get in touch with us. Me on my email address. You can easily find that one online, as a lot of scammers have found. So thank you so much. Look after yourselves, and we'll speak to you again soon.